Don, thank you very much for agreeing to sit down and talk to us. First of all, congratulations. I understand you've been running a general aviation business effectively for 50 years, which is no
Yes, a
small
little bit
achievement.
over that.
A little bit over that.
Yes, unfortunately.
Wow. Well, I think it's probably a good idea to go back to the very beginning and ask how you got into it, because I heard on the grapevine there was alcohol involved.
Well, yes, I usually put it down to drink because I was a member of a gliding club. I'd been in aviation really since making model airplanes as a child, and when I came to join the Bristol Airplane Company in Bristol, I joined the gliding club to keep getting airborne. And in the bar in the evening, we would talk about various aviation subjects, and someone mentioned about balloons, and we started investigating it, and we found that the new type of hot air balloon had just been invented in America, and we ended up building our own, which was the Bristol Bell.
And you built what? You just got together and cut out some fabric and sewed it together?
Yes, we did. We had various people who had some talent to do it. Two of us were aeronautical engineers. One of us was quite an experienced gas balloonist, and the actual construction was done at a parachute company.
Okay, and then, I mean, out of that, this is an amazing building in Bedminster in Bristol, and I think it's probably one of the biggest balloon factories in the world.
Well, it's certainly getting there.
In terms of your ballooning, did you kind of give up gliding and focus entirely on building and flying balloons?
More or less, I slipped out of gliding when I started to become active in balloons. There are only so many hours in the day. Ballooning is best in the early morning and in the evening, and gliding is best in the middle of the day when the thermals are going. So at one time we thought we'd be able to do things all day, but I don't think we had enough stamina for that.
Talking of stamina, I mean, I guess many people know balloons from their kind of effectively a tourist flight. So lift off from maybe somewhere in Bath or something like that, and then fly for, I don't know, 40 minutes or half an hour or something and land in a field. But I think I also read you did a bit of long distance ballooning. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, long distance ballooning is fascinating. We very much enjoyed. I've enjoyed doing it, and we've enjoyed arranging it for other people. I tried to fly the Atlantic on one occasion in 1978, and got to within 100 miles of France, but didn't quite make it. And then in 1992, I took part in the Transatlantic balloon race, and made it that time, landing in Portugal.
Okay, so let's just go back a step. Transatlantic balloons, I presume, are not your normal hot air balloon that you would do that in.
No, a hot air balloon wouldn't make it. You have to be able to fly for several days. We use a type of balloon called a Rosier. It's named after Pilatre de Rosier, who invented the idea, and who unfortunately died on his first flight with this type of balloon, because the hydrogen caught fire. But we use the helium, which is not flammable, and makes the whole idea feasible.
So how does a Rosier balloon differ from a hot air balloon?
The Rosier balloon is mainly filled with helium,
Yeah.
but it has a hot air space underneath. When a regular gas balloon flies, in the evening the gas cools, and you have to throw out maybe 15% of the system weight. And this means that you can only fly for a certain length of time. 4 days is about the limit for a regular gas balloon. But with the Rosier, instead of throwing out ballast, you heat the gas using fuel to keep it warm. And it turns out that the weight of fuel that you must use is far, far less than the amount of ballast that you'd have to throw out. So this means you can fly for very much longer.
Across the Atlantic, in fact.
Yes, a pure gas balloon can just about get across the Atlantic, but we've built balloons that have flown around the world. The first one flew for 20 days.
And that was a Rosier balloon?
That was a Rosier.
So
I don't think any gas balloon has ever flown for 20 days.
no. Okay. So coming back to your first Atlantic crossing, where you ended up 100 miles short of France, that was you were basically out of fuel.
We went out of fuel. No, we could have flown longer, and maybe we could, but we'd run out of wind going in the direction of France.
Oh, okay.
And we were in an area that was beginning to sort of show signs of heavy thermal activity, which is never much fun in a balloon. But I've often wondered if we'd managed just to stay around there for a couple of days, if we'd have picked up another wind. But of course we were very exhausted by that time. But anyhow, there we are. We decided to stop at that point.
And what kind of altitude would you attempt to fly the Atlantic at?
You can fly at any altitude you like, except you mustn't fly too low. If you fly low down, you'll be drifting across the isobars and you'll finish up in the center of a depression.
Yeah.
But if you fly high enough, you can fly winds in various ways. And in fact, it's a great game of chess, really. You have to figure out where the winds are going. If you get a weather chart, which you can get through by radio, you can see where the weather is going to be acceptable, and you can see the winds at different heights. And so you maneuver to get to where you want to be at the next stage, and then you reassess it all again. It's quite a technical job working out your strategy to make the crossing, using it step by step in the weather system.
The second time you made it, you landed in Portugal.
Yes, that's right.
And that was presumably, apart from, was that a different skill set or better weather or?
More experience, I think. We'd learned a lot more about it by that time. But it was quite interesting. We finally got near to Portugal and we spoke to the air traffic controller, and he said, you should consider landing on the beach, because he said it's nothing but mountains and forest in this part of the country. So we came in and we approached the beach, and as we came low, the wind turned left and we were going along and we were getting no nearer to the beach. So we had to go up again to get the wind going in and then come down and then land on the beach like it was a runway.
So I mean, for that kind of thing, have you still got a retrieve crew trying to follow you to find you, or?
On that kind of flight, it's very difficult. We have a control center. So when we landed, we got the HF radio working again and let them know where we were. And the retrieve then set off and would take 24 hours to reach us.
Back to the challenges around Cameron balloons as opposed to Don Cameron's balloon flying. You became pretty well known for, I think you pretty much invented the whole special shape market.
Yes, I think we were the first to make a hot air balloon as a special shape, and I think we still make most of those. It's again a thing that we like doing quite a lot.
Absolutely. Have there been many that someone's brought along a sketch and said, I'd like one of these, and you've just gone, like, can't do that?
We try not to say that, but I've been asked what shape could you not do, and I've said a pedal bicycle would be difficult. You have to have a bit of volume to it, but if you don't have volume, then it would be better to have artwork on the side of a regular balloon.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, is there a rule of thumb that says, I don't know, what the volume of balloons is measured in, presumably in cubic meters, is it?
Yes, cubic meters or cubic feet.
Or cubic feet. Is there a rule of thumb that says for this much payload you need this much volume?
Yes, the lift you can get is about 8 or 9 kilograms for each 1,000 cubic feet.
Wow.
So that means you can pretty well calculate what volume you need to lift any given payload.
And the biggest balloon you've ever built?
Biggest one is one that we built for an altitude record by a Russian pilot, and in fact it's still here because we're not allowed to ship any aviation products to Russia.
Oh, so it's a recent?
Fairly recent. Well, it's been here for 2 or 3 years now.
So and that's for an altitude record of a hot air balloon?
Yeah.
I mean, I presume if it's a hot air balloon altitude record, do you know off the top of your head what the altitude record is for a hot air balloon?
It's, the altitude is around something like 70,000 cubic feet, a bit over.
Wow, that's
70,000 feet, sorry,
yeah.
not cubic feet. So that's more than twice the height that airliners fly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and presumably you've also, I mean, apart from the fact that it's going to be pretty windy, wind shear, and all sorts of other things on the way up, there's going to be, you know, the envelope is presumably also going to expand.
Well, the envelope has to be big to start with. It doesn't really expand much if it's made of regular fabric, but it'll be a very low super temperature at the start. But once it gets up to the point where the air is so thin that buoyancy is limited, the limit is that you have to heat the balloon so hot that you can't go any further.
Impressive.
And of course you have to get your burner to work at altitude. And when you're down to 4% of the air density, then getting a burner to work is quite a challenge.
And it's a burner that just works from the atmosphere. You can't feed some oxygen into the burner.
Well, you can do things like that. You can feed oxygen into the pilot flame, but to feed enough oxygen into the burner would require, again, a lot of weight, which would work against you getting high.
The world of balloons, like everything else, is a world of compromise.
Yes, it's a compromised design. We're trying to get the optimum that will give you the maximum height.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And if you had to kind of sum up the philosophy of Cameron balloons and its balloon design, what would you kind of, how would you describe that?
Goodness, I don't know if we have any.
If you don't.
Any philosophy, we just love balloons and we love the challenge.
And presumably, I mean, I accept this is a very naive question, but in the balloon world, everything is a bespoke order. You don't say we're going to build 5 stock balloons that are blue or something, and then put them on the shelf and wait to sell
We do
them.
in fact build some stock balloons in jolly colours, and they do sell, particularly at times when delivery times are long. It solves people's problems, but by and large, everything is a custom order. Most balloons have decorations on them. Sometimes people manage to fund their hobby by getting sponsorship and carrying advertisements on them. So there's quite a lot of decoration needed on balloons, and each balloon tends to be unique.
If my body clock changed and I suddenly discovered that I liked getting up early in the morning and I wanted to buy a balloon, and I knocked on your door and said I'd like just a normal four-person balloon, please, or 2-person balloon, something quite small, not a commercial balloon. What's the kind of time it takes from putting the order in for my specific colour? No special shapes, just a...
The time it takes varies quite a lot. If you come to us now in the winter time, we can probably turn it around fairly quickly. In the summertime, sometimes it goes out to several months.
Okay, and fairly quickly might be what, a month or 2 or something, or?
Well, I would say about 8 weeks if we're not hurrying, but if someone comes to us with a real need to have it quickly, then we can do an express order on it.
And can you use, I don't know much about the airworthiness of special shapes, but can you use special shapes for commercial passenger rides as well?
I don't think anyone does that, because the special shape is heavier than the regular balloon. The optimum balloon shape is the shape of the standard balloon, and the special shape envelope is heavier, and it's very effective at making a visual impact in advertising or being a work of art, but it's less efficient for passenger carrying.
Okay, so over the years, clearly you've gained quite a lot of respect, not only in the aviation world, but in the wider world. And I was looking at some photos the other day, and I spot this particular picture appears to be you with the Queen. And
that was a wonderful moment when Bertrand Piccard and Brian Jones had used our balloon to fly around the world, and it was the first to fly around the world. We were due to have a visit from the Duke of Edinburgh, and he and the Queen were in Bristol on that day, and the Queen was visiting other places. And I remember the Lord Lieutenant saying, if they make it around the world, the Queen will come as well.
And there she is.
And there she is.
And during that whole project, it was the first around the world trip, how quietly confident were you in the balloon?
Well, we weren't confident at all because we'd built perhaps a dozen or more balloons for people attempting to fly around the world. And as we learned more, they got further and further. But this was the one that finally made it.
So during that whole process, is there kind of like a control center here? Does everyone get updated every morning? How closely do you follow?
Well, there's a control center somewhere. In fact, the control center for this flight was in Geneva Airport. And we had a whole suite of rooms given to us to run the control center. And when the flight started, I was in the control center for a while. And it was quiet. In the watches of the night, everything was dead quiet in these airport rooms. And I came back to Bristol and then went out towards the end of the flight. And by that time, everybody realized that we were about to make it. And there were television vans outside and cables snaking into the control room. And it was a totally different scene.
Can you tell me about this picture?
That picture is a picture taken during the Transatlantic balloon race, where I'm flying with my colleague Rob Bailey. And as you can see, it looks a bit like a gypsy caravan with all the stores slung outside. But it's a sea survival gondola with a burner. The thing hanging on the right is a generator, and we have various fuel tanks all around. You can see a trail rope on the left because that's useful in a gas balloon for landing. We don't use them in hot air balloons.
So what's it called in a hot air balloon where you...
In a hot air balloon, when you're landing, you can control the flight path by controlling the timing of the burner.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what you learn to do when you're learning to fly a hot air balloon. And you can become very, very accurate. Even a student pilot who's been flying for 3 or 4 hours, I can ask him to pick a leaf from the top of this tree that's coming up, and he can fly accurately enough to do it. So you can control them quite well, and you just bring it in and grease it on if you can, and then you have to deflate the balloon. The balloon has a thing at the top called a parachute, which is like a parachute, and it just sits in a hole in the top of the balloon, held in there by air pressure. And when you're landing, you pull it out, and that allows the balloon to deflate. So if you're landing in a wind, for example, and you're dragging across a field with some dangerous obstacle at the downwind end, you want to stop as quick as you can. So we do need to have an adequate way of deflating.
I see you have a train named after you.
Yes, I was lucky enough to have a train. I wouldn't describe myself as famous, but I'm slightly well known in the local area. And there was a local thing where various people were named and put up for people to vote on. And I was very kindly voted in to have a train named after me. So it was a great honour. So we had a little ceremony at Templemead Station.
Of all the kind of special projects, I don't really mean special shapes, but I mean kind of world records, altitude records, endurance, whatever other records there are. What's been your favourite? What would you say is your biggest achievement as far as that's concerned? And which one, if there is one indeed, would you look back on and go, I wish I'd never even got involved in that, it was such a pain?
I don't think there are any that were such a pain. I think everyone is their favourite one at the time. But obviously the round-the-world flights were the pinnacle in terms of achievement, I suppose. And we've had 3 of those. Bertrand and Brian did the first one, and then Steve Fawcett took off from Australia and went around the world and landed back in Australia again. And this was in an unpressurized gondola. Steve Fawcett was an amazing character. He lived high in the Rockies so that he could accustom himself to low oxygen levels, which meant that he could survive better in an unpressurized gondola. And then the third one was a Russian pilot. We were still supplying aviation products to the Russians in those days. This was 2016. And He is quite a character. He's done all sorts of adventurous things, like rowing a boat across the Pacific Ocean from New Zealand to Tierra del Fuego. He flew around the world. Quite a tricky flight. Went across the Pacific very well, but as he passed South Africa, the winds took him down near to Antarctica, and this was winter time, so it wouldn't have been a good time to be there. But the meteorologists had it under control. They knew that he would enter a wind taking him back up, and he came back and he overflew the control center in Australia, only a few miles from where he'd taken off. He didn't land at that time because he wanted to land in the evening with calmer air, so he flew on further and landed in Australia.
You have to have a kind of a long-term mindset, it seems to me, in a balloon, where you're kind of, particularly in one of those record balloons, where but you said earlier, if we'd have hung around for a couple of days, I mean, that, for someone who doesn't fly balloons, who flies aeroplanes, is like the thought of, well, I've got an hour's fuel left, not a couple of days' fuel.
When you're up in a long-distance flight, it gives you the feeling of being separated from the world. Probably something like people feel in a space capsule, because you can communicate with people by radio, but other than that, you're just quite separate. If you've forgotten to bring anything, then forget it. You're not going to have it, and you're going to be several days. I remember getting this feeling on the Atlantic flights, and then when we flew to the Soviet Union, it was almost surprisingly different, because I remember flying over the middle of Copenhagen in the early evening, looking down and seeing all the people going into restaurants and things, and we were much nearer to the real world than we were flying in the Atlantic.
Presumably some of that is now going to change. I mean, I'm imagining that every long distance around the world flight will probably have Starlink internet on board and be zooming to their friends and family and sponsors and all sorts of other people, and that kind of feeling of isolation and otherworldliness might go.
Flying long distance balloons has already changed. Every expedition that happens, it's different communications equipment, but and navigation equipment. I remember on the first flight in 1978, I relied mostly on astronavigation, using a sextant, and I had taught myself to use it, and taking a sighting of the stars and the moon and the sun.
Yeah, that's a pretty funky way of navigating.
We had to get subsequent position estimates, and from that you could work out the speed we were doing. But nowadays you can use your GPS and you can just read off the speed. And of course it makes it very much better, because if you want to know what winds you have at different heights, you can just do an excursion down to the surface and back up again and make notes of the wind direction and speed, and you can plan your flight more effectively.
In terms of balloon design and special shape design and record balloons, is there any innovation or changes, any material changes that will come along that will improve things even further? Or have we got to the natural?
The idea of the modern hot air balloon was originated by a wonderful guy called Ed Yost in America, and his first balloon was very primitive compared to what we have now, but we still use the same two elements. We use man-made fibers for the envelope, and we use a controllable propane burner. Before that, hot air balloons had a bonfire built into the base, and you had to stoke piles of twigs onto it and things. But a controllable burner made it practical. And these two elements are still with us today, but there have been many, many improvements. The modern hot air balloon is much more practical than Ed Yost's first prototype.
Is there any trend at all in the ballooning world anywhere for a move towards electric? I mean, so people are talking about electric aircraft and drones and cars and
yes,
everything else.
We're very conscious of the fact that we'd like to be a little more green, but an electric balloon is pretty much impossible. An electric car is much heavier than a regular car, and that doesn't matter if you've got wheels on the road. But a balloon can't take the extra weight of batteries that would be enough to produce the quite strong amount of heat that we need. But we can use biofuel. It's just a question of signing up for that. You pay a little bit more, but you're using biological fuel. And you don't need to modify your burner, because actually what happens is if you pay the gas company more, they put more biofuel feedstock into the mixture, but it's still the same propane lorry that turns up and fills your tank. You don't need to worry about modifying anything.
Okay, got it. Understood. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the kind of balloon enthusiasts around the world who might look at this, and in the UK, and of course the Flyer live stream viewers?
Goodness, I don't know. Keep flying is the main thing.
Keep flying.
It's ballooning is the most wonderful way of flying. You can fly low and you can talk to people on the ground. And it's a thing that is very practical, more like boating than flying, I suppose. And it's also a thing that's very social, because it needs a few people to put a balloon out and to have a chase crew. So it builds friendships as well.
So it seems to me that there are kind of like little single-seat cloud hopper type balloons, which is great, but a little bit antisocial maybe. Then there are kind of balloon baskets that seem to have 4. But I've seen some walking around the factory here that you could put like almost a football team in.
Well, that's right. You could put more than a football team. And I think the biggest one we built was for about 30 people. Although we have built a 50-person basket, but that was a special. That wasn't really for commercial use. It was almost a stunt.
Yeah.
But the balloons divide into, I would say, 3 groups. There are the big balloons, which can take quite a number of passengers, and that's much more economical for anyone offering passenger rides. So, and it needs a commercial pilot who's perhaps more skilled than average to fly these balloons. Then there are the smaller balloons which carry 3 or 4 people or less, and they're used for sport. And the small sport-sized balloons are also used for advertising. So sometimes we have balloons that are built for advertising with professional pilots.
So one of the key questions that many people are going to be wondering is if they want to get into ballooning and they decide that one day they want to own their own balloon. If we're just talking about a balloon for sport, no special shape, nothing special. Give me a rough price range of what it's going to cost for someone to be able to buy a balloon, and how long could they expect that balloon to last?
This question, I'm usually out of date, but I would say it's about £30,000, which is quite expensive for the average person. So people tend to club together to do it, or even better to find a sponsor if they don't mind flying with an advertisement on the side of the balloon. So there are ways of doing it. But for people thinking of starting, the thing would be to join your local balloon group, get involved in a bit of crewing for a while. And if you crew for somebody, they'll give you a flight sooner or later, hopefully. So it's a way of getting started.
And how long does a balloon last?
A balloon lasts for, well, typically we would say maybe 400 hours. It doesn't sound a lot, but if you're flying even once a week, that would be 8 years. The envelope, of course, can be renewed. The basket and burner last indefinitely.
So in terms of baskets, they look kind of, in a way, they look quite old-fashioned. They're a little bit like garden furniture. They're wicker, presumably. Have they changed much?
They're very much garden furniture. They're made from the same materials, the rattan that comes from Indonesia. But they're very traditional, and we sometimes wonder why here we are more than 200 years and we're still using basket work. And indeed, we have some baskets which are not basket work. The collapsible ones, for example, and that may go further in the future, but people still like the woven basket.
So after kind of 50 years of running a GA business and building one of, if not the biggest balloon factory in the world, how could you summarize that? Can you summarize that journey in a kind of couple of short sentences?
Well, it all seems to have gone by in a flash. But here we are. Time moves on, and there have been a lot of developments and a lot of great experiences. So I'm not regretting it.
Excellent. Don Cameron, thank you very much.